August 17, 1943. RAF Nettershall, England. A cold pre-dawn mist drifts across the steel matting of the runway, pooling in the grooves like thin ghost-white fog trapped between the rivets. A distant generator thumps, sending a low vibration through the ground, while B-17 engines rumble awake one by one, each startup shaking frost from aluminum skin. The air tastes of fuel, exhaust, and damp earth, the smell of emission from which too many would not return. In the half-light, ground crews move with rigid, deliberate movements. Breath fogs in front of their faces. Tools click against engine cowling. A mechanic's flashlight beam flickers across scorched metal still bearing shrapnel scars from previous missions. Recon photographs are pinned inside briefing huts, ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt and aircraft factories at Regensburg, outlined in red pencil. The crews already know it. This will be one of those missions that leaves something behind in every man who flies it. Inside the cockpit of one of the lead B-17 FS, gauges glow a dull amber. The interior is cramped, smelling of oil, cordite residue, and cold metal. Condensation beads on the windows. The pilots sit strapped in, helmets brushing the ceiling, hands tight on the control yokes as the engines settle into a steady, throbbing harmony. Outside, propwash hurls debris down the runway like scattered sand. A soft vibration runs through the fuselage as bombs are locked into place, cylindrical shadows waiting in the dark belly of the aircraft. A gunner checks his .50 caliber, the metal freezing against his gloves. The ball turret hangs beneath the bomber like a glass sphere suspended above the void. Every crewman knows Flak is waiting somewhere across the channel, black blossoms rising from German guns, shredding oxygen lines, slicing through fuel tanks, tearing aluminum skins apart with jagged cruelty. A final nod from the crew chief and the fortress taxis forward. The runway lights blur into streaks through the canopy. The engines roar, heavy and primal, drowning out the cold morning silence. When the wheels lift, the bomber shudders as if fighting gravity's last grip. It rises into the thick English fog and disappears toward the eastern horizon. Above the channel, the formation grows. Dozens of fortresses take their positions until the sky becomes a geometric pattern of wings, contrails, and engine haze. From below, they look like drifting steel constellations, each aircraft vibrating under the strain of altitude, weight, and the invisible pressure of what awaits over Germany. Radio chatter crackles between aircraft, short, clipped, professional bursts. Nothing wasted. The higher they climb, the colder it becomes. The fuselage groans as the metal contracts. Oxygen masks tighten over faces. Frost spreads across the inside of the glass like creeping white veins. The engines bite into the thin air, leaving a constant, uneasy hum inside every man's skull. The German coast appears as a distant dark line slowly rising into clarity. Beyond it, flak towers and radar stations stand like black teeth along the shoreline. In a bunker near Hamburg, a German radar operator traces blotches across a glowing screen, a dense swarm moving southeast at altitude. He lifts a handset. Sirens begin to rise across the region, first as faint echoes, then as a rolling metallic scream reaching airfields and cities far inland. The formation crosses into hostile airspace. Below, fields and river bends slide past like shadows. The flak begins almost immediately, distant black bursts that seem to hang suspended, pulsing outward in slow-motion rings before dissolving into drifting smoke. The crews know the rhythm well, puffs at long range, then the quick, violent cadence when the guns find their altitude. The first accurate bursts rip the morning sky apart. The concussion slams through the aircraft like invisible fists. Shrapnel clatters off the fuselage, punching dents into metal, slicing holes through the tail, leaving trails of silver fragments spinning into the slipstream. The smell of burnt cordite mixes with the cold air pouring through ruptured seams. A gunner braces as the fortress lurches. His gloves stick to the metal from the cold. Below him, the ground flashes with muzzle bursts as German 88s track the altitude. Smoke trails climb toward the formation like rising black pillars. The flak is so thick it seems almost solid, a dark storm wall through which every bomber must fly. The crews remain locked in their positions. Eyes scan the heavens for fighters. Every second stretches, vibrating with tension. The interphone hums with static, short calls, altitude checks, oxygen reports. The smell of heated metal fills the nose section as the forward guns swivel, scanning the brightening sky. Ahead, the horizon flickers with sunlight breaking through layered haze. Contrails twist like pale ropes behind each bomber. The flak grows denser, craters of black bloom around the formation, shaking the aircraft, making the wings flex with each shockwave. A fragment tears through the side wall and lodges in a radio operator's table. Another rips through a tail gunner's ammunition box, sending brass casings spilling across the floor, rolling with the vibration of the engines. Yet the fortresses hold formation, maintaining their rigid, geometric pattern despite the storm building around them. Every man aboard knows the cost of drifting out of position, isolation, interception, and a slow spiral into the ground. They press on. And far ahead, beyond the flak belts, beyond the haze, beyond the rising smoke columns, the city of Schweinfurt waits, its factories marked for destruction, its defenses tightening with every second the fortresses draw closer. The mission has only just begun. The first factories of Schweinfurt lie somewhere beyond the horizon, hidden beneath distant haze, but the German defenses no longer wait in silence. As the fortresses press deeper into Bavaria, the air grows sharper, colder, and louder, the rhythmic thud of flak now replaced by the mechanical howl of engines climbing fast from below. Shadows flicker beneath the formation. A line of dark specks begins to rise, growing larger, angling upward with predatory precision. Me-109s and FW-190s. They appear at first as faint silhouettes, then as sharp black shapes slicing through the white glow of morning sunlight. They climb through the flak bursts, weaving between smoke columns, diving through the debris patterns the guns have carved into the sky. Their wings flash briefly in the light, then vanish into the sun, reappearing only as streaking shadows. The interphone crackles with short warnings. Gunners pivot their .50 cals, the metal groaning in the cold. The barrels jitter as the fortress vibrates at altitude. Frost cracks on the windows from the sudden temperature shift. Every gunner scans the sky with eyes that burn from oxygen-dry air. A pair of German fighters break through the contrails above the front elements, diving at high angle. Their engines scream, leaving thin spirals twisting behind them. The forward guns of the B-17s erupt with muzzle flashes, each burst a brilliant strobe against the pale morning. Brass casings bounce across the floors, rattling down the metal ribs of the fuselage. The enemy fighters slice past the nose, their cannons spitting white sparks. Tracer lines streak through the formation, thin, glowing scars across the sky. A fortress in the high left box takes the first hit. Smoke bursts from its number 3 engine, the propeller seizing before windmilling into a violent spin. The bomber falls out of formation, sliding sideways, its silver skin already darkening with fire. The formation tightens automatically, instinctively, each pilot making micro-corrections. Spacing shrinks until wingtips seem dangerously close. But if the formation loosens, the fighters will carve them apart. More German interceptors rise from the east, a wave, then another behind it. Sun glinting off cockpit glass. Cannons flashing. A pair of FW-190s drop beneath the formation, climbing into the blind spot toward the belly of the lead elements. Their timing is exact. They fire upward. Shells impact the bomb bay doors of a forward fortress, ripping holes through the metal as the aircraft jolts violently. The concussion shakes nearby bombers, the shockwave echoing through the tight clusters. Inside the radio compartment, vibrations travel through the floor like distant tremors. The smell of hot wiring fills the narrow space. Loose fragments rattle. The oxygen system hisses steadily. Outside, the sky is turning chaotic, vapor trails twisting, flak smoke swirling, fighters streaking through like pieces of shrapnel launched from the sun. A ball turret gunner tracks a diving 109. The turret rotates with a low mechanical whir, its small glass windows fogged with the gunner's breath. He keys the triggers. Twin streams of tracers arc upward, carving through the cold air. The fighter banks sharply, slipping behind a column of black smoke before vanishing. The fortresses continue to plunge forward, refusing to slow, refusing to break formation. Every second draws them deeper into the maelstrom. Below, the ground shifts from rolling fields to industrial outskirts, warehouses, roads, rail lines, and rows of identical housing blocks built for German factory workers. The smoke from the flak drifts across the rooftops like drifting black curtains. The fighters come again. A coordinated attack, 20 or more climbing in staggered lines, timed so each wave hits exactly as the previous breaks away. Their engines emit a rising mechanical scream that vibrates through the fortresses even before the attack begins. The lead wave fires first. Cannon bursts churn the air. One shell detonates near a tail section, shredding control cables that snap like snapped guitar strings. Another fighter rakes a forward fortress from wingtip to cockpit. Glass explodes. Metal peels open like torn cloth. The bomber holds altitude, but only just, the nose dipping, rising, dipping again. The gunners answer in short, controlled bursts. Tail guns, waist guns, chin turrets, the entire formation becomes an overlapping web of fire. Tracers streak outward in a widening arc, intersecting, weaving, creating a deadly mesh the fighters must penetrate. A 190 catches a burst directly across the engine cowling. Flame engulfs its right wing as the aircraft spirals downward, trailing a long, twisting line of oily black smoke. But the Germans keep coming. From high above, a quartet of 109s dives straight at the heart of the formation, using the sun to blind the gunners. They release cannon shells at point-blank range. The impacts are brutal. A mid-column B-17 shudders violently and begins to fall back, its left wing dripping fuel from a jagged tear. Another fortress loses its dorsal turret in a burst of fragmented metal. Still, the formation grinds forward. In the command ship, maps shake on the navigator's table as turbulence from flak bursts ripples through the fuselage. He traces the route with a gloved finger, only minutes now until the initial target zone. The factories lie beneath that thickening haze ahead, hidden under layers of smoke screens already billowing across the city. The fighters know it too. They press a final coordinated assault, a last attempt to break the bombers before they reach Schweinfurt. Engines roaring, cannons blazing, they dive aggressively, forcing the gunners to split their fields of fire. The sky becomes a storm of steel, tracers crossing, cannon shells bursting, aluminum fragments spinning like shrapnel leaves in the wind. The city finally emerges. Long rooftops. Factory yards. Chimneys coughing black streams into the sky. Rail lines branching outward like iron veins. The haze is thick, but the shapes are unmistakable. Schweinfurt. The moment the Germans fought so hard to prevent is seconds away. The bomb bay switches arm. The altitude settles. The formation straightens, rigid and unbreaking. The strike is coming. The city of Schweinfurt unfurls beneath the fortresses in a dense grey haze, its industrial district marked by angular roofs, rail yards, and hulking factory blocks that seem frozen in the morning light. Smoke screens drift across the streets in long, deliberate sheets, thick, oily, and carefully laid by German defenders who know exactly what is coming. The haze clings to the rooftops like a second skin, rising in slow folds that partially obscure the ball-bearing plants the bombers were sent to erase. The formation descends slightly, settling into bombing altitude. The aircraft vibrates with the strain of the final approach. Bomb bay doors open along the length of the wavering line of B-17s. A cold wind rushes upward into the cavities, rippling through the aircraft and carrying with it the faint chemical scent of high explosives. The mechanical whir of bomb racks unlocking is swallowed by the distant thunder of flak guns preparing for their most brutal barrage. Below, the first flak batteries ignite. Black eruptions bloom upward from every corner of the city. Open fields, factory courtyards, rail sidings, rooftops fortified with camouflaged guns. The sky turns into a churning, shimmering field of expanding smoke bursts, each one followed by the hollow concussive thump that the crews feel more than hear. Shrapnel slices upward through the formation, tearing through bomb bay doors, puncturing fuel tanks, ricocheting through the frames of waist gun positions. Inside one of the lead fortresses, the bomb sight glows faintly in the dim forward compartment. The bombardier grips the cold metal handles, breathing slowly through an oxygen mask that fogs with each inhale. His view through the glass is clouded by drifting smoke, disrupted by rising blasts, blurred by the violent shudder of flak detonations. The crosshairs wobble across the target box, stabilize, then wobble again as another burst rocks the aircraft. The pilot up front holds the fortress steady, fighting the instinct to weave or climb. Bombing accuracy demands stillness, a stillness that feels suicidal when the entire aircraft is being hammered from every direction. More flak bursts. Closer now. Tighter. Louder. One explosion blooms so near that its flame washes briefly across the nose glass. A panel in the radio compartment tears free. Oxygen tubing flails like a loose vine. In the waist section, a gunner yells into his mask as fragments punch through the bulkhead, spraying insulation into the air like floating snow. But the line holds. Bombardiers across the formation lean into their sights, adjusting, recalibrating through shaking hands. The industrial heart of Schweinfurt fills the bomb sites, the massive SKF, Kugelfischer, and Vereinigte factories, ball-bearing giants that feed nearly every German tank, aircraft, and vehicle. Destroying them will cripple production lines across the Reich. The crews know this. The defenders know it too. The flak intensifies with a desperation that feels almost sentient. Then the first wave of bombs falls. The release light flashes. The payload drops away, disappearing into the smoke-laden void. For a moment, the aircraft lightens sharply, rising slightly on instinct. Bombs from the trailing fortresses cascade downward, a synchronized metallic rain that plunges past drifting smoke banks and vanishes into the haze swallowing the streets below. Seconds stretch. Then the city erupts. Through gaps in the haze, brief glimpses of destruction break into view, shockwaves rippling across factory roofs, explosions tearing through assembly halls, walls collapsing inward as fireballs pulse outward like living, expanding spheres of heat. Windows shatter in cascading lines. Rail yards buckle, their steel tracks twisting upward as if lifted by invisible hands. But there is no time to watch. The second wave arrives. More bombs fall. More ruptures roll through the industrial blocks. German gunners respond with frantic intensity. The sky becomes a cauldron of fire and steel. A massive burst shreds the right wingtip of a fortress in the high group. The aircraft spins slightly, leveling only because the pilot wrestles the controls with every ounce of strength. Smoke trails from the wound like a black banner. Another bomber takes a direct hit to its bomb bay, erupting in a violent flash that sends fragments spiraling outward like burning shrapnel. Nearby fortresses jolt as pieces strike their fuselages. The fighters return. 109s and 190s dive through the smoke screen, their engines howling, wings glinting as they cut into the kill zone at knife-edge angles. They weave between the rising flak bursts, firing short, brutal cannon salvos into exposed gun positions. Their silhouettes flicker like dark predators moving through flame. A waist gunner fires on instinct, his tracers slicing arcs through rolling smoke. He glimpses a fighter only long enough to see its nose flash, then the concussion of a near miss throws him against the bulkhead, knocking the wind from his lungs. Gasoline fumes drift through his position as a ruptured line sprays fuel in a thin mist that freezes mid-air. The fortresses continue straight, rigid, unbending. The bombing run ends. Bomb bay doors retract, metal grinding against metal. The formation banks slowly, heavy with battle damage but holding together in tight, disciplined arcs. Below, the city roils in fire and shockwaves. Smoke columns rise in layered stacks, lit from within by burning machinery and detonating stockpiles. The destruction is immense but hidden beneath the haze, like a wounded giant still writhing beneath its own smoke. The fighters surge again as the fortresses turn away from Schweinfurt. They attack from the sun, from below, from the blind angles between the bomber elements. Their tactics shift, now focused not on preventing the strike, but on destroying as many fortresses as possible before they escape Bavaria. The flak follows them outward. Shells burst in thick curtains across their escape route, each detonation sending new shockwaves slamming through battered frames. Oxygen masks rattle. Controls vibrate. Loose fragments rattle inside cramped compartments. Blood from shrapnel wounds freezes on cold flight suits. Yet the formation presses west. They leave behind a burning industrial landscape, one struck harder than the Germans dared imagine, but the cost of escape will be brutally high. And the long road home has only just begun. The turn westward drags the formation directly into another wall of flak waiting beyond the city limits, a second ring of guns positioned to catch any aircraft escaping the strike zone. Smoke still trails behind several fortresses, drifting into thin white ribbons that mark the sky like scars. Engines cough. Control surfaces flutter. Frost mixes with hydraulic fluid on shattered glass. The crews brace again for impact. The first barrage hits with brutal, disciplined precision. Shells burst in tight clusters, calibrated to the altitude and speed the bombers cling to. Black detonations blossom at eye level, sending shockwaves through the airframe with a force that rattles teeth. Aluminum quakes. Rivets pop. The sound is not a single blast but a layered sequence of violent tearing, as if invisible claws rake across the formation. A mid-column fortress takes a direct burst under the right wing. A geyser of flame engulfs the engine. The propeller twists free, spiraling into the void. The aircraft rolls sharply, its wing dipping, then dropping fully. It slides downward like a sinking mass of metal, smoke pouring from the torn engine mount. Alone, instinctive radio call crackles, then silence. The bomber descends in widening spirals until the haze swallows it completely. Still the surviving aircraft press on. The fighters come again, fewer now, but more desperate. A pair of 109s climbs fast from below, cutting into the formation's underside. Their cannon bursts punch holes through the belly of a fortress, shredding the ball turret and leaving its glass shell hanging open like a broken lantern. Another pair dives from the sun, raking a trailing bomber until one of its stabilizers shears away, sending the aircraft into a slow, heart-breaking roll that can't be corrected. The men inside the trailing fortresses watch helplessly as it turns, spiraling downward through drifting smoke, disappearing between columns of rising fire as the earth reaches up to claim it. Yet the formation refuses to disintegrate. They tighten again, battered engines growling, wings trembling under the weight of damage, but still holding. Formation discipline is the only shield left. The gunners fire short, controlled bursts as the fighters press ever closer. Spent casings dance along the flooring, clattering against bulkheads, shimmering briefly in the thin sunlight before falling into the slipstream. A final cluster of fighters dives headlong into the lead element, forcing the forward gunners to fire at nearly point-blank range. A B-17 takes a burst directly into the cockpit canopy. Glass explodes in a white flash that sprays fragments across the flight deck. The co-pilot slumps, oxygen mask torn free, but the pilot drags the aircraft back into position with shaking hands, blood freezing on his glove. The German fighters peel away, fuel dwindling, altitude dropping, engines strained from the relentless climbing and diving. One by one they vanish toward distant airfields. The last trace of them is a thin streak of exhaust dissolving into the thick Bavarian haze behind the bombers. But the danger is not gone. Miles of hostile territory still separate the fortresses from the safety of the channel. The battered formation slowly gains altitude, using what power remains in their engines to crawl back above the thickest flak zones. The air grows colder, the wind more violent, the aircraft more fragile. Inside the cabins, silence takes on weight. Gunners wipe frost from cracked windows with torn gloves. The radio operator checks damaged equipment, coaxing faint signals from a battered console. The navigator traces their return route with a trembling hand, the map beneath him fluttering with every vibration from the wounded airframe. Oxygen hisses steadily through patched tubing. The smell of burnt metal, cordite, and leaking fuel mixes with the cold air until it becomes the scent of survival itself. Hours pass in a slow, grinding ascent toward safety. Below, the landscape shifts, fields, forests, winding rivers, the skeletal remains of towns half hidden in smoke. The sun begins its downward arc, casting long, cold shadows across the torn skin of the fortresses. Some aircraft fly with entire sections of their fuselages missing. Others limp forward on 2 or 3 engines, their propellers spinning unevenly, frames wobbling with each gust of crosswind. But the channel finally appears. A thin, silver line at first. Then a broad sheet of water glinting under the late afternoon sun. The sight sends a surge of exhausted relief through the formation. Even in their numb fatigue, the crews feel it, they have escaped the worst. Not unscarred, not victorious in any triumphant sense, just alive, and carrying home the weight of everything left behind. Ground controllers pick up the fortresses on radar. Air-sea rescue boats move into position. The staggered shadows of the bombers stretch across the water, drifting slowly westward as if pulled by the tide. They cross the English coast in a long, uneven procession, a procession of damaged giants returning from a sky that tried to tear them apart. One bomber lands with its landing gear frozen halfway. It skids across the runway, sparks streaming behind it, finally resting in a cloud of dust and shredded metal. Another touches down with a dead engine coughing flames, ground crews racing before the aircraft even stops moving. A fortress with a hole through its cockpit canopy lands so hard the tail bounces. Others simply glide in with empty fuel tanks, dipping dangerously low before the wheels grip the runway. One by one, the bombers fall silent. Engines slow. Props tick. Metal cools. Wings settle under their own weight. The airfield becomes a landscape of battered steel, smoke drifting through the fading light. Medics move among the aircraft. Ground crews stare at the holes punched clean through fuselages, counting the scars and quietly marveling that so many returned at all. The strike on Schweinfurt has devastated critical German production, yet the cost has carved itself deeply into the men and machines that carried it out. The industrial fire they left behind will echo across assembly lines for months, but the memory of the route through Flatten fighters will remain far longer. As dusk settles over the airfield, the remaining fortresses rest in long, silent rows, damaged, exhausted, but unbroken. And the final glow of sunlight catches their torn aluminum frames, turning them into faint silver silhouettes that stand as quiet witnesses to the brutality of the sky they survived.